Welcome back to the Book Nook. I'm so glad you could join us for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Today, we're cracking open The Science of Selling by David Hoffeld.
Yes, a fantastic choice.
And this one was actually suggested by you, our listener.
Always eager to tackle the books that you're most interested in.
Absolutely. So we're really excited to dig into Hoffeld's research-backed strategies, see what actionable insights we can pull out for you, whether you're in a formal sales role or just looking to be more, influential and persuasive in your everyday life.
Right, because let's face it, we're all selling something in a way, aren't we?
You got it. An idea, a
Yeah.
perspective, even ourselves in a sense.
Exactly. And so often there's this, misconception that selling is all about some innate talent or just having the right personality.
Yeah, you're either born a salesperson or you're not.
But Hoffeld really challenges that notion. He dismantles that myth by offering a real solid framework of strategies grounded in scientific research.
I love that, taking the mystery out of it.
Exactly.
So think about it, listener. Those times you felt your message just wasn't landing, or you've wondered why some persuasive tactics work and others fall flat.
This deep dive should offer some, science-backed explanations for those experiences.
Exactly. We're going to try to pull out the really practical, actionable takeaways from Hoffeld's research, stuff that you can start using almost right away.
Love it.
So to kick things off, Hoffeld really emphasizes understanding those fundamental psychological processes behind how people make decisions, particularly buying decisions.
He calls it aligning your approach with those natural tendencies, and it's incredibly powerful stuff.
Okay, so to start unpacking this, Hoffeld identifies these two primary paths to influencing someone, these two routes.
The peripheral route and the central route. Two very distinct pathways to influence.
Could you walk us through the core differences between them?
Sure. So think of the peripheral route as those elements that aren't really part of the core message itself. It's more about those mental shortcuts, those heuristics that our brains use to make quick decisions.
Got it. If a product has a celebrity endorsement, we might be more inclined to trust it without scrutinizing the details.
Precisely. You're using a mental shortcut there. Hoffeld talks about a few key heuristics. One that's particularly relevant, I think, is scarcity.
Scarcity.
The idea that things seem more valuable when they're, limited or perceived as limited.
Oh, limited time offer or
Yeah.
only a few left in stock.
Exactly. He mentions a study about a soup kitchen, actually.
Soup kitchen.
Yeah. They put up a sign that said, limit of 12 cans per person. And guess what? Sales doubled.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Just from that one little sign.
Simply because it implied scarcity. It tapped into that innate fear of missing out, that FOMO, and that kind of thinking, well, if it's harder to get, it must be more valuable.
That is fascinating. So how could our listeners sort of leverage this idea of scarcity ethically, of course?
Well, think about how you can frame your offerings, whether it's a product, a service, an idea, as exclusive, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be about quantity.
Right.
It could be about timing, like tying it to a current trend or a need that you've identified in a conversation.
Okay, so making it feel like a limited time opportunity to really capitalize on something.
Exactly. Create that sense of urgency, but do it ethically, of course.
Okay. What are some other heuristics that our listeners should keep in mind?
Social proof is another big one. That's the idea that we're heavily influenced by what other people are doing.
Right, like that old saying, if everyone else is jumping off a bridge.
Well, hopefully not that extreme, but you get the idea. Hoffeld uses the analogy of choosing between a packed restaurant and an empty one.
Okay, yeah, we're naturally drawn to the busier one.
Exactly. We assume it must be better if everyone else is there, right?
Makes sense.
He also references Ash's conformity experiments. Remember those?
Oh, yeah, where people were willing to give obviously wrong answers just to fit in with the group.
Exactly. It just goes to show how deeply we're influenced by what others are doing and saying, even if we know it's not right.
Wow. So how can our listener, ethically use this principle of social proof?
Well, think about showcasing testimonials.
Oh, right. Letting others sing your praises.
Exactly. Or highlighting the popularity of your ideas, especially within relevant groups.
Okay, makes sense. So we've got scarcity, social proof. What's another one of these mental shortcuts?
Another interesting one is what Hoffeld calls the asymmetric dominance effect.
Asymmetric dominance effect. That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a fascinating concept. Imagine you're helping someone choose between two options, right? Let's say two service packages.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now, if you introduce a third option that is clearly inferior to one of the originals, it can actually make the better of those two original options seem much more attractive.
So it's like the apples to oranges problem, but instead of comparing an apple to an orange, you introduce a bruised apple, making the original good apple seem even better.
Exactly. That inferior option simplifies the comparison for people. Their brains can easily see which is better, making the decision feel less, cognitively demanding.
Oh, that's clever. So instead of overwhelming someone with options, you're actually helping them by streamlining the decision-making process.
Precisely. And again, it's about doing this ethically, of course. But the takeaway is that you can strategically frame choices to guide decisions in a subtle way.
Got it. So those are some examples of the peripheral route of influence, those mental shortcuts. What about the central route? You mentioned that earlier.
Right. So the central route, in contrast to the peripheral route, focuses on the strength and quality of the message itself.
Okay, so it's about the substance of your argument.
Exactly. It's about appealing to someone's reason and logic. They carefully consider the information you're presenting, weigh the pros and cons, and are persuaded by the evidence.
So it's a more thoughtful and engaged process.
It is. And we'll actually delve into how to craft a persuasive message for the central route a bit later when we talk about Hoffeld's 6 whys.
Okay, perfect. So we've got the peripheral route, those mental shortcuts, and the central route, which is all about the strength of the message itself. Now let's get into this idea of selling the way people buy that Hoffeld talks about, which he frames with his 6 whys.
This is where it gets really interesting. Hoffeld's research shows that buying decisions aren't these big sudden leaps.
Right.
They're a series of smaller incremental mental commitments.
Makes sense. We don't just jump from I'm not interested to take my money.
Right. And those 6 whys represent those crucial mental steps a buyer takes along the way.
Okay, let's break them down. What's the first why?
The first one is why change?
Why change?
Yeah. It's about getting people to recognize a need, to see that there's a reason to move away from their current situation.
Okay, so it's about prompting that internal recognition instead of just telling them, hey, you have a problem.
Exactly. And Hoffeld emphasizes the importance of challenging the status quo with insights. Present potential problems or opportunities that they might not have considered.
Right, so to nudge them into that aha moment.
Exactly. He gives this example of starting a conversation by saying something like, many of our clients originally came to us because they were dealing with these 2 particular issues, and then you elaborate on those issues and see if they resonate.
Got it. So it's about framing things in a way that helps them identify their own need for change.
Precisely. And once you've established that need, the next question is, why now?
Why now? Okay, so this is about creating a sense of urgency.
It is. But Hoffeld also wisely talks about this psychological concept called reactance.
Reactance?
It's that knee-jerk resistance we feel when we think someone is trying to limit our freedom of choice.
Oh, yeah. Like when someone's being too pushy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful not to trigger that reactance by being too aggressive or forceful.
So how do you strike that balance between creating urgency and respecting someone's autonomy?
Well, Hoffeld suggests framing your call to action in a way that acknowledges their freedom. Something like, of course, it's entirely up to you, but we've found that those who act sooner tend to see benefits more quickly.
Right, so you're nudging them in the right direction, but not pushing them over the edge.
Precisely. Now, once you've addressed why change and why now, the next question is, why your industry solution?
Why your industry solution? Okay, so now it's about differentiating yourself from the competition.
Right, but Hoffeld makes this interesting point that sometimes your biggest competitor isn't another company in your industry.
Oh, interesting. Who else could it be?
It could be the prospect of them doing nothing.
Oh, right, like inertia. Just sticking with the status quo.
Exactly. Or thinking they can solve the problem themselves without any outside help.
So, like in that software training example he gives, the real competition wasn't another training company, but clients thinking, oh, we can just figure this out on our own.
Precisely. So you need to articulate the unique value of your industry's approach. Show why it's superior to those alternative solutions, including doing nothing.
Okay, so it's about highlighting that specialized knowledge and experience that you bring to the table.
Exactly. You might even point out some potential pitfalls they might encounter if they try to go it alone.
Okay, so we've got why change, why now, why your industry solution. What's the next why?
The 4th why is why you and your company.
Okay, so this is where you really start building trust and credibility.
Exactly. Hoffeld talks about the importance of what he calls credibility statements. you know, clearly and confidently conveying your competence.
So it's not just about saying, trust me, I'm an expert. You need to back it up with evidence.
Right. It's about demonstrating your knowledge and trustworthiness.
Okay, so let's say you've established trust in yourself and your company. What's the next step?
The fifth why is why your product or service.
Okay, now we're getting to the heart of the matter.
This is where you showcase the specific value you offer and align it with their buying
Their
motives.
buying motives, right. What are they really looking for? What are their needs and desires?
Exactly. And Hoffeld emphasizes the importance of understanding the emotional drivers behind decisions.
Because we like to think we make rational decisions. But emotions play a huge role, don't they?
Absolutely. He highlights two primary emotional drivers:
Okay, which are
the desire for gain and the fear of loss.
interesting. So we're motivated both by what we want to gain and what we want to avoid losing.
Precisely. And he gives this example of a telecom company that successfully lowered cancellation rates by focusing on what customers would lose if they canceled.
Oh, interesting. So instead of emphasizing what they would gain by staying, they highlighted what they would miss out on if they left.
Exactly. It's about understanding what truly matters to the other person on an emotional level and tailoring your message accordingly.
That's brilliant. Okay, so we've covered the first 5 whys. What's the final one?
The sixth why is why your price.
Okay, this is the one everyone's usually a little apprehensive about.
It is, but Hoffel breaks it down in a really helpful way. He talks about establishing value in relation to the cost and addressing those inevitable price concerns.
Right, because no matter how great your product or service is, there's always that question of, is it worth the price?
Exactly. And Hoffeld talks about this psychological concept called anchoring.
Anchoring.
It's the idea that the first piece of price information you introduce can really influence someone's perception of what's reasonable.
Oh, interesting. So if you start by mentioning a higher price, even if it's not the actual price, it can make the actual price seem more palatable.
Precisely. It sets a reference point. But beyond anchoring, you also want to make sure you're framing the price in terms of the value it delivers.
Right. So instead of just saying, it costs this much, you emphasize the long-term benefits, the potential savings, the increased efficiency.
Exactly. You're justifying the investment by highlighting the return.
Okay, so we've gone through all 6 of Hoffeld's whys. Now, how should our listener actually use this framework in their conversations?
Well, the key takeaway is that you should aim to gain agreement to each of these whys throughout your interaction, not just wait until the very end to try to close the deal.
Right, so it's a more gradual, conversational approach.
Precisely. It's about building a case and getting buy-in at each stage of the process.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Hoffel also talks quite a bit about the importance of emotions in decision-making. He argues that if people aren't emotionally connected to your message, they simply won't care enough to act.
Right. He even mentions Antonio Damasio's research on individuals with impaired emotional processing. They could logically understand their choices, but without that emotional component, they couldn't make a decision.
Wow, so emotions are truly essential for making any kind of choice, even seemingly rational ones.
Absolutely. So, what can our listener do to positively influence emotional states in their interactions?
Yeah, what are some actionable strategies?
Hoffeld outlines several. One is utilizing what's called emotional cognition.
Emotional cognition.
It's the idea that emotions are contagious. We tend to mirror the emotions of those around us.
Oh yeah, like if you're around someone who's really upbeat and positive, you naturally feel a little bit more upbeat yourself.
Exactly. So bringing positive energy to your interactions can have a subtle but real impact on the other person.
So enthusiasm is key.
It is. And another strategy is to verbally convey your strong beliefs. When you express genuine passion and conviction about what you're offering, it can be very persuasive.
So it's about letting that authenticity shine through, that genuine belief in what you're saying.
Exactly. And another interesting strategy is leveraging what's called the Hawthorne effect.
The Hawthorne effect.
It's the idea that people tend to change their behavior when they know they're being observed. In the context of emotions, Hoffeld suggests that simply calling attention to someone's emotional state can actually help shift it.
Oh, interesting. So instead of ignoring those negative emotions, you acknowledge them.
Precisely. For example, if someone seems hesitant or resistant, you might say something like, "You seem a little uncertain about this. Is there anything specific you'd like to discuss further?"
That's a great way to open up a dialogue and address those underlying concerns.
Exactly. And finally, Hoffeld talks about the impact of changing nonverbal behavior. Our physical actions can actually influence our feelings, and to some extent, the feelings of those around us.
Right, like body language. If you're slouching and frowning, it sends a different message than if you're standing up straight and making eye contact.
Exactly. And while he mentions studies on things like power poses, for most people it's about being mindful of those basic nonverbal cues. Maintaining good eye contact, having an open posture, using hand gestures appropriately.
Right, those subtle things can make a big difference.
They can. And they contribute to creating a more positive and receptive emotional environment.
Okay, so by being more aware of those strategies, emotional cognition, conveying strong beliefs, the Hawthorne effect, and nonverbal cues, we can all become more attuned to the emotional dynamics of our interactions.
Absolutely. And as you can see, we've really just scratched the surface of what David Hoffeld covers in The Science of Selling. There's so much more to explore in the book.
Absolutely. So listener, if you're looking to really dive deep into the research and practical applications of these principles, we highly recommend picking up a copy of The Science of Selling.
It's packed with even more detail, real-world examples, and specific strategies that can help you communicate more effectively, influence decisions, and ultimately achieve your goals.
Thanks so much for joining us in the Book Nook today.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, listener, the power of persuasion isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding human psychology and using that knowledge to build genuine connections and create mutually beneficial outcomes.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So go out there, put these insights into practice, and let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear your success stories.
Until next time.
Happy selling.